The banquet hall smelled of roasted chicken and polished wood, laughter echoing under crystal chandeliers. Glasses clinked, silverware chimed, and for a moment it felt like a celebration worth remembering, but then his voice sliced through the warmth like a blade. Frank, my stepfather, slammed his glass down so hard the sound rang across the tables. His eyes narrowed at me, and in front of cousins, neighbors, and old family friends, he sneered, "She's nothing without me." The words hit harder than the sound of the glass. My cheeks burned as whispers rippled through the room. I sat frozen, the sting spreading deeper with every chuckle that followed his remark. I could see the smug grin on his face, soaking in the humiliation he'd poured over me. I stayed silent. But inside, a storm began to rise. Would I bow my head, or let him see the truth? I was only 12 when Mom remarried. Frank walked into our lives with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world. At first, he was charming, always loud at the dinner table, telling stories that made Mom laugh. But slowly, I learned how different he was behind closed doors. He never saw me as his daughter. To him, I was the quiet one, too young, too small, too unimportant. He'd smirk whenever I offered ideas, cutting me down with little remarks, "Stay in your lane, Mary." After Mom passed, things grew worse. He acted as if everything she left behind was his alone, the house, her savings, even the keepsakes she had promised me. He'd pat me on the shoulder and say, "Don't worry, sweetheart, you wouldn't know what to do with money anyway." Every comment carved a scar I carried silently. But I worked hard. I studied late nights in that same old house, the walls still carrying Mom's scent of lavender. While Frank dismissed me as a shadow, I built myself piece by piece, stronger, sharper, determined to prove that silence did not mean weakness. Now, years later, sitting in this hall under the glow of chandeliers, I could feel the old wounds reopen as he mocked me again. His arrogance had only grown with time, but so had I. The whispers around the table grew louder, as if everyone waited to see whether I would shrink away once more. This time, I wasn't the same girl he thought I was. Frank leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. His booming laugh rattled the silverware. "Mary never earned a single thing," he announced, raising his glass again. "Even the roof over her head is mine." The words stung, not just because they weren't true, but because he said them so casually, as if stripping me of dignity was a party trick. I could feel eyes on me. Aunt Linda shook her head with pity, while Uncle Robert whispered something under his breath. Across the table, my cousin Charles smirked, as if he agreed with Frank's cruelty. I stayed silent, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. Inside, my heart pounded steady, like a drum before a march. Frank leaned closer, his grin sharp. "Tell them, Mary. Tell them how you'd be lost without me." The room chuckled, but a few faces grew uneasy. Betty, an old neighbor, frowned at his words. The laughter wasn't as strong now. I looked at Frank, then at the crowd. My lips parted, but I stopped, letting the silence hang heavy. People leaned in, waiting, curiosity building. I allowed myself the smallest smile, not of weakness, but of knowing. A quiet spark that only a few noticed. Whispers swirled around the hall. "What does she mean? Why isn't she defending herself?" Frank mistook my calm for defeat, his chest puffing larger with each insult, but he didn't realize the very storm he mocked was already forming, ready to strike. The question now wasn't whether I would answer him, but how. The hall had gone quiet, the laughter fading into uneasy murmurs. I rose slowly from my chair, the legs scraping against the polished floor with a sound that made every head turn. My hands didn't tremble. My voice, when it finally came, was calm but sharp enough to cut the air. "You've told everyone how I'm nothing, Frank," I said, meeting his smug eyes. "But you forgot something? Mom's house and her savings were never yours. She left them to me." A gasp rippled through the room. Chairs shifted. Glasses spilled midair. Frank's smirk faltered, but I wasn't done. "For years, I stayed silent. I let you play king of the table. But while you mocked me, I built my own life. That roof you claim? It's in my name. And the money? It funded the business you never thought I could manage. Today, that business owns 3 properties in this very town." The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Linda's hand covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Robert's usual frown turned to stunned respect. Even Charles leaned back, his smirk gone, but the one who froze completely was Frank. His face drained of color, his jaw stiff, as if the ground beneath him had slipped away. I took a breath, steady and strong, letting my eyes sweep the room. "You thought silence meant weakness," I said, my voice steady. "But silence gave me power. And tonight, everyone here finally knows the truth." The crowd erupted, whispers, gasps, and even soft applause from the back. People looked at me with new eyes, the weight of respect settling in the room. Frank sat motionless, pale as stone, his arrogance shattered before the very people he sought to impress. for a long moment, no one moved. The hall was suspended in silence, every eye on Frank as he sat there, rigid and pale. His fingers twitched against the stem of his empty glass, but no words came. Then, slowly, the tide shifted. Betty, the old neighbor, nodded at me with a proud smile. Aunt Linda leaned closer to whisper, "Your mother would be so proud, Mary." Even Robert, usually so stern, gave a small, approving nod. The respect that had been denied me for years was finally mine. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it in silence, patience, and perseverance. Frank slumped back. The grin he wore so confidently now vanished. He had wanted me small, invisible, dependent. Instead, he was the one left diminished, his pride broken in front of the very people whose admiration he craved. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply gathered my purse, rose with steady grace, and walked past him without another glance. The chandeliers glittered above me, but the true light was the dignity I carried out of that hall. Behind me, whispers swirled, not of pity, but of respect. My silence had spoken louder than his insults ever could. At the door, I paused just long enough to let my final words hang in the air. Respect isn't taken, it's earned. And with that, I left Frank sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance, while I walked forward, stronger, free, and finally seen.